coming into the room. Good morning and welcome to another Ladies Room Wednesday right here on Power 95. So we're just going to give you guys an opportunity quickly to come on in so we can start the conversation because you know how time goes around here. And we don't want to run out of time and not be able to have all what we need, what we wanted to discuss said. So that's where we are. And I think you guys are ready. So let me just make sure that you're hearing me properly. Our sound and everything is good to go. So let us get the show on the road. As always, a pleasure to have you here. And of course, remember the ladies' room comes to you compliments our good friends at Western Union, Subway, and Beacon Insurance. They're making today's program possible. So for that, we say thank you so much as we continue with our show. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest properly. Live inside the ladies' room this morning, Prime Minister of Barbados and the current chair of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, Prime Minister Mottley. Good morning and welcome. It is indeed a pleasure to have you inside the ladies' room. How are you?
I'm fine, and I'm demitting office, so I'll be gone. Technically, Prime Minister Gonzalez takes over today, but I will be handing over to him on Friday.
Okay, so I guess that's a good
But
place to start.
I wanted to make sure that the last place that I spoke was here in Grenada.
Wonderful. We definitely appreciate that. And we're so thankful to have you here with us. So we're going to get into the conversation. And of course, I can't, because the program is called Ladies Room, I can't have this conversation and not, delve a little into your background. And of course, you're coming from a rich political background, grandfather, father, uncle. Um, did they have any influence on you joining the political arena at such a young age of 26? And how did this prepare you for the leadership role in the BLP?
Well, they obviously handicapped me by exposing me to too much politics from too young an age. So they didn't give me much of a chance to get away from it. And not so much the politics, but more from the point of view of the passion of wanting to speak for people who have no voice, or the passion of wanting to be able to take a blank canvas and see how we're going to paint it and fill out all of the spaces with respect to building out our country. I feel that those who worked in the first generation of independence did a magnificent job in creating that platform for us, allowing us as a region to start to transition and to improve the quality of life of many of our people. But as to be expected, you can't reverse 3 to 4 centuries of exploitation and hardship in 3 decades or 4 decades. And therefore, we see this as a race, a relay race. And we will run our part of the relay and pass to those who will come after. I hope that we will, as was done by the previous generation, who inspired many of us, that we are in a position to inspire many to recognize that we Caribbean people are global citizens, that once we keep our Caribbean roots, that we can make a valuable difference in humanizing the world. The world can be very cold. It can, especially in large countries, ignore and forget the rights of small people, minorities, because they don't have to deal with them face to face. We deal with people every day. And whatever else we do, whether it is in COVID, in a hurricane, post COVID, no disaster, it has to be about giving our people the best chance to move to the next level in life.
Through the grapevine, a little bird whispered something about you having Grenadian roots and connections.
That's true.
Tell us about that.
My grandmother's Grenadian, and as a child, um, I spent a lot of time with her, and she would tell me these stories about Grenada and St. Paul's and Grand Anse Beach. And long before I ever saw Grand Anse Beach, I knew about it in my imagination. Long before I ever came to Grenada, I knew about the mountains. Long before I knew about so many other aspects of how you played carnival and your jab jab. And I mean, you know that in the Caribbean, we are grandmother's children.
Definitely. So, in terms of You being at the helm and, of course, Prime Minister, how has the journey been for you thus far since your success at the polls in, what we call one of the region's most stable democracy?
It's been rough. The truth is that we knew we came in with the task of having to stabilize the dollar. Barbados's dollar was under severe pressure. We had less than 400 million Barbados, 210 million really US in reserves at the time. And we were going into the hurricane season, and we had a major debt payment that would have taken 100 million Barbados, 50 million US from that within 3 weeks. And we took the decision to be able, like Grenada, to confront and to develop a homegrown program, which we consulted on widely across the country. The social partnership was fully on board, the labor movement, the private sector. And we therefore went with that program, restructured our debt like you, and went to the IMF and said, look, we need some help stabilizing. And more than even the money, because the amount that the IMF lent was not a large amount per se, but what was more important than even the money was the imprimatur that this country was taking the right decisions and would be worthy of confidence of third party and domestic players with respect to the program that we had for the homegrown program. We were able to move and restructure our debt, moving it from 177% to 118%, both domestic and external. And that meant that we would now be in a position to be able to have government play the role that it should have been playing over the course of the last decade, when it stopped maintaining roads, stopped dealing with public infrastructure, stopped buying buses, stopped buying garbage trucks, stopped providing funds in the hospitals and in the schools, stopped being able to have a aggressive capital works program. So by restructuring debt, just as you did in Grenada, you were able to come back to the fundamentals. The difference is that we finished restructuring the external debt in November last year, and less than 6 months later, we're into COVID. So it feels as though we've been sent back to the starting line, but this time we're going to run the race with two 50-pound weights in our hand, each hand, and 30 pounds on each foot. But we can make it because we've done it already. We know the difficulties, but we'll make it. All of us in the region.
In a little bit. But Prime Minister Motley, without a doubt, you have, and of course, for those who've been following along, you have demonstrated superior leadership. And I'm sure my listeners would like to know, to what do you credit your success, your ability to think critically? And another one, in terms of, will you be willing to coach and mentor aspiring female politicians?
Yeah. Thank you for your compliment. The truth is that I don't carry compliments well. So, and I try to stay focused on the job. I try to do the job that I have, not the one that I want. I try to make sure that we have basic principles that we adhere to. I keep saying all the time that principles only mean something when it is inconvenient to stand by them. And I find that when you have a complex situation, go back to first principles. Go back to being able to understand what is it that you've really come to defend. Sometimes there will be collateral damage for people who you would hope that there'd be no collateral damage. If you can minimize or mitigate that damage, please go ahead. But if you can't without causing greater problems, then you've got to confront and speak to people directly and say, look, this is where we are. We still have breath. As long as we have breath, we have hope. Let's go another way. And in many instances, in going another way and in finding a platform for collaboration and truth, you build the trust that is necessary to propel growth and to propel prosperity. But we have to carry each other along. I mean, there's no way of feeling that I can move and sprint like Bolt, and people back there walking barely or in a wheelchair and can't move. Can't work. We have to walk with each other and carry each other. That is how Caribbean people got through 3 centuries of slavery and colonialism. That's the only way we're going to get through a world in which, even though we're independent, regrettably, many countries and many people in the world still don't see us until they need us for a vote or for some other major issue. And they still don't hear us regularly. So we have to say the same thing over and over and over. And if you're tired in saying it, then you lose the battle.
Mentorship, and someone is making the point in the chat that you are doing that by, speaking and having these conversations, and what have you. But on a more one-on-one touch, I mean, we're in a field that was dominated by men for years, the political arena, and now we have more women coming into the fold. Thence my question was, will you be willing to,
Yeah,
coach and mentor aspiring female politicians since you started so young yourself?
yeah. I actually was going to come back and answer it. The truth is, I have an obligation to, and I have benefited myself. Billy Miller has been like a big sister to me throughout my entire public career. And through her, I met Eugenia Charles. It's through her that I was able to learn a lot about the rudiments of politics. And people see politics and look at it only here at national. But politics is also fundamentally first about people. It's about people on the ground. And the day that we forget about that is the day that we literally ought to ask ourselves if we're in the right profession. Similarly, politics is also about policy and credible. Because if you can't do for people and if you can't represent people, people will begin to say, "But what's the sense of you talking pretty and changing my life? I want to see how you're going to make a difference to our lives." And to that extent, your philosophical rooting, especially if you're going to believe in principles, matter. So, yes, I'm more than willing to mentor other young female politicians, young politicians, period, because I have a passion for this region. You know, there was a time when I used to say, boy, I wish I was born at the time that I could have been there as one of the independence builders. But little did I know that what we face in the region today is as grave and as critical to the region's stability as at the time of independence. And that what is required of us is to be able to root our people and we can't educate people and then treat them as if they're not educated. We have to have the conversations with them. And we have to get them to understand that building a country is not simply about electing a government. Building a nation is about literally creating opportunities for those who can exploit them, and then understanding what are the limitations for those who cannot immediately exploit those opportunities, such that you can help remove those obstacles for them, whether it is because they're victims of physical abuse, mental abuse, lack of economic opportunity, poverty in its rude and rawest form, discrimination. All of those are the social things that the government that is interested in the public space, in the public framework, in social justice, is well positioned to do. Similarly, the government must create opportunities, and I've been trying, even here in my own country, to be able to say, look, we cannot criminalize entrepreneurship. We have to be able to ensure that we create the opportunities where people can go. That's why we're trying to move towards digital payments. That's why we're trying to streamline how people do their businesses in the region. Certificates of character, when I first came in 2 years ago, people had to wait 6 weeks if they wanted a certificate of character to go for a job. Now you can get a certificate of character within minutes. So those are the things that we need to be able to do to just make people's lives easier and to allow people to sleep a little easier when the night comes. And if we do our part, then those that come behind us, that hopefully we will mentor and bring on, will continue the race and continue to understand that what matters is keeping Caribbean people safe, allowing them the opportunities to be the best that they can be through education and economic opportunities. They don't only want a piece of the rock, but they want a piece of the action. And it is our duty as second generation independence leaders to give them that. Now, it is constrained by these global difficulties that we have, but even with that constraint, we can make it.
About the region, because that was my next question in terms of, have you always been region focused as a person, or is it because you joined the political arena?
No, I think that luckily I was brought up in a house that had a very strong sense of regional consciousness. I told you my grandmother is from Grenada. My mother was born in Aruba. I have aunts and uncles born in Aruba, in Martinique, in not Martinique, sorry, in Guadeloupe, in Saint Martin, in Barbados. And I have on the other side of the family a lot of family from Trinidad and a lot in Jamaica now. So that for me, within the context of my own immediate family, I understood the diversity of this region. And whether we like it or not, the pandemic and the hurricanes are telling us that language and seawater cannot separate us. We're not going to make it on our own if we allow language and seawater to separate us.
Right. And in terms of course, COVID-19 and, each island country, whatever, having to deal with it, when COVID-19 presented itself as a challenge, did you have any preconceived ideas as to what to expect by ways of regulations, protocols, and even the length of time we'll be dealing with it?
We suspected it would be long, and we prayed that we were suspecting wrong. But we're very much into something that's going to be with us at least, I think, for a year to 2 years. And the consequences of COVID are far more than just the public health consequences alone, as grave as those are. So that's what makes it difficult, because if we were facing one battle at a time, we could easily get through it. But it is the continuous rapidity, boom, 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 that makes it difficult. And quite frankly, we need to cooperate. And that's why the WHO uses the theme of solidarity, because they understand. I heard the American Dr. Fauci talk about it again yesterday. We are in this together. And if we don't get that we're in this together, then we can't wrestle it down successfully. And you've done a wonderful job in Grenada, as have other countries in the region, in being able to wrestle it down. The problem is that we still have to live. And everything that we need, we don't produce. And everything that we have to do invariably has some level of international element in it, which means that we have to learn how to manage risk. Now, a person can stay in a house and eliminate the risk of being knocked down by a car because you're not leaving the house. But that doesn't allow you to live. So how do you balance the risk? And how does a government equally reorder its priorities to be able to take on the additional health expenditure that has been hurled at it in the middle of the night, and be able to take on the additional expenditure for social safety net support, whether it is through our social security schemes or the complementary aspects of it that we do through welfare and capital works, because people have to eat. When all is said and done, government sound fancy, but people have to eat every day in this region and all over.
Reopening. And someone here is asking, what is it your country is doing differently that has allowed you to have reopened your economy with little or no restrictions related to COVID-19, with the exception, of course, the borders?
I don't think that we're doing anything significantly differently from others in the region. I think we in the Caribbean have worked together to try to be able, as far as possible. I mean, I listened to your Prime Minister and your Minister of Health, and believe you me, they have been some of the ones in the region that have been leading in this respect, and the results show it. In the Eastern Caribbean, we've been very lucky. And in the Southern Caribbean, Trinidad has a luxury that we don't necessarily have, because it's not as dependent on tourism as the rest of us. And I keep saying, if I had the options that Trinidad had, I'd probably keep the country locked off, but we don't have that luxury. In the first 2 months of the fiscal year, April and May, our revenue was down 31% and our expenditure up 21%. And we expect, even though we expect that to tail off for now, the reality is that coming into the winter, if they claim, as they have, that this is going to be another wave, then we have to be ready for those things again. The difference is that we are now far better prepared. We were able in Barbados to convert a former naval base into a hospital. We now have 38 primary care intensive care beds and 40 secondary care intensive care beds. So 78 intensive care beds effectively at that facility, plus over 120 tertiary care beds, which are those step-down ones for those who don't need the ICU care. In addition to that, we have other quarantine facilities ready. In addition to that, we're talking to hotels, a few of them, to possibly be satellite testing centers, as well as, in some instances, one instance in particular, an isolation center. Last night, I announced the fact that my government is going to be launching very shortly a 12-month Barbados welcome stamp, because we recognize that part of the difficulty in COVID is people who are traveling for short stay visits. And we need to be able to encourage far more long stay visits than we had. I really feel that is part and parcel of what is going to be required to carry us through this difficult period, because we need the generation of the economic activity. I'm trying, for example, to use the opportunity of the summer to have as many of our school children visit our tourist attractions, because I believe that the first tourist is your national. My first tourist is a Bajan. Your first tourist is a Grenadian. And therefore, if our people know the sites and have been exposed to them, they can't just read them in a book. They got to go and see what Harrison's Cave looked like. They got to go and see all of the sites in Grenada. They got to go and see all the sites in the different countries in which they live so that they can speak meaningfully. And when a tourist comes in, what's the first thing they ask you? Hey, what do the locals do? Where do we all go? What do you do?
So correct. When you said that you don't think that you've been doing much differently in terms of the islands and what they've been doing, because a couple of weeks ago I spoke to our own to Grenada's Minister of Tourism, and she basically echoed the same sentiment of
Mhm.
having like many other islands, sand and sea and what have you. The tourism industry has been dealt a severe blow as a result of COVID. So how do we get those involved in the sector at least to earn their daily bread and what have you, the tour guides, the taxi operators, etc. How do we get them to do that?
Well, as I said just now, we have to be our first tourists. And the notion of staycations, there are a lot of Grenadians, a lot of Bajans who would have been traveling in normal circumstances out. The ones who regrettably, have lost their jobs are not in that position to do so. But there are a lot of people who are still working. And to that extent, rather than being able to go up north where, as you can see, COVID is raging, stay within the region, stay at home in a staycation, go next door to Grenada, go to St. Vincent, go to the Grenadines, go to St. Lucia. If Trinidad opens back up, go to Tobago. But these are the things that we must do to be able to ensure that we are generating enough activity, as you correctly said, not just for the hotels, but for the taxi drivers and the craft people and the different things. Now, when Bajans come to Grenada, they can buy craft. When Bajans come to Grenada, they don't have a car. They're going to use a taxi in St. George's. When you come to Barbados, same thing. So that we believe that however much we can stimulate activity from our domestic and regional populations, as well as limited tourism, because the truth is that as long as we're doing the testing, we don't have the capacity to be able to test the numbers of people who were coming in. We were getting over 20,000 people a week before we shut down in March. There is no way Barbados is going to see those numbers before winter again. But equally, the numbers that we will start to see from this month, July, will go some way towards making sure that they can mitigate against the losses that we would otherwise have been suffering in April and May, June.
One which says, what do you believe have been the most significant factors in implementing the significant shifts and changes that you've been able to achieve in Barbados and in the region in the last year?
Cooperation and partnership, without a doubt. Look, we will go as far as we can based on how many people we're taking with us. And we need to just pause and have the mission to which everybody agrees. Sometimes you have to adapt the mission because the population isn't ready for the whole stretch that you may want them to carry. And therefore, I believe in claiming ground and moving again, claiming ground and moving again. And I believe that if we can do that while talking with, not at or to, but talking with a lot of our people, regardless of their stations in society and regardless of the thing. The private sector is not only the large merchants, the private sector is the hawkers, the private sector is the vendors, the private sector is the taxi men. So that when we were making decisions about whether to shut down Barbados or not, and they were bringing the traditional private sector along. I said, no, go and let the vendors association come. Go and bring the taxi drivers and the co-ops, because we need to hear from all, because everybody is going to be affected. And the tolerance level of the population and the tolerance level of the households is going to, in large measure, be dependent on how we relate to them, how we talk with them, how they talk back. Look, we introduced this thing in Barbados recently called the Barbados Optional Savings Scheme. And it's a way of our repurposing part of our wages expenditure to be able to apply it to capital expenditure so we can create activity for the tens of thousands who have been laid off as a result of the closure of tourism and the other businesses that depend on tourism. It was not perfect when we brought it as a government, but through partnership and collaboration and conversation with the unions in the private sector, but particularly the unions, we were able to create something that in fact is propelling the creation of our secondary financial market so that people will take the bonds. In some instances, they're going to keep it because it's an attractive interest rate of 5%. In other instances where they would love to keep it or they don't care nothing about it, they make it available to other people to buy, either other citizens outside of the public service or credit unions. Now, we were only able to refine that and to come up with that so that we could make the constitutional amendments with almost virtual unanimity by having that level of partnership and conversation. And it was the first meeting I had when I swore in, the cabinet was sworn in on the 28th of May with the social partners. We have to walk together because there are those in the international stage that are not walking together with us. And if we have division internationally and division locally, we ain't going nowhere. So we have to at least leave the local and regional stage with as much unity as we can. And unity only comes through trust, and trust comes through conversation and partnership and shared values.
Just a couple more questions, but in terms of course, you're the outgoing chair, as you told us earlier. Are you satisfied that under your tenure as chairman of CARICOM, that the regional grouping collaborated enough to combat the effects of the pandemic, or is it a case of each man or woman, in your case, for himself?
I think we did reasonably well. I think we could have done better, but we did reasonably well. The truth is that people forget the Caribbean community is a community of sovereign nations, which means that each country is entitled to take its own decisions. We also have a platform that's premised on functional cooperation. And I think it has been in this area of functional cooperation that we've seen the greatest change. Let's break it down. And that's why I feel strongly that we have to commit, even as we commit to secure national expenditures on vital issues, we have to commit to secure regional expenditure on critical regional institutions. Impacts has an entity out of Barbados, and ironically, I was responsible in a previous life in 2006 for helping to create it, called the Joint Regional Communications Center. They're the ones who provide from Suriname and Guyana in the south, to Bahamas in the north, from Barbados in the east to Belize in the west, with the flight information and information on ships. Anybody coming into our waters, to our airspace, that advanced passenger information systems are supplied to us, and it has allowed our people to go forward with greater confidence over the course of the last 14 years. It didn't now come 14 years with respect to being able to make the kinds of decisions to manage our ports of entry better. And then, of course, if that's done, it means that Port Health and others can collaborate with it. And that is how we were able to manage the screening even before, when COVID was raging in January and February. It is only in the middle of March, but we were able to use APIS information to help us manage our borders. Similarly, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, as we speak, the CARFA is the entity that's been testing for a lot of Caribbean countries. And if we don't allow it to continue to do so, where would individual countries be? As we speak, SEDIMA is preparing for what might befall them in this context of the hurricane season. But more importantly, what is not known. And we're going to make an announcement later today about a common platform for procurement. But SEDIMA has been the entity that helps us manage the logistics and will continue to help us manage the logistics of supplying these things to individual countries. And believe you me, these regional institutions are vital. And of course, you have the Secretariat. So I would say that, yes, we could have done better. We always can. But equally, I recognize that without the critical regional institutions and common protocols that we established, we had a meeting with the cruise ship industry here in March, and with the public health officials. We've been able to also reach settled protocols with one another and a minimum threshold to help countries reopen their borders. And we've continued to be able to see how we can cooperate with respect to other aspects of public health to be able to get us through COVID. Where the cooperation perhaps has not been as evident has been in the domestic economic packages that have been put together. Similarly, there are consequences. LIAT is one of the consequences, regrettably, of of our inability to be able to continue to afford. And therefore, Liat has a lot of legacy debt. But we are committed as a region to ensuring that there is affordable, safe, and reliable air transport and maritime transport for that matter. I asked CARICOM, for example, to prepare a paper for me last week, the Secretariat. They have 38 airlines flying in this Caribbean region. Of those 38, 9 are from overseas, like American Airlines and JetBlue and Air Canada, etc. But 29 exist. Now, it is true that by far the greatest majority of them is in the Northern Caribbean. But in the Southern Caribbean, you have a number of them already flying. And we've had a number of applications within the last few days to various countries for others to fly. So it's a sad moment, but equally, we are not going to leave Caribbean people stranded because we understand that at the very core of the community is the issue of transport and communication. People may forget, and COVID has certainly displaced us. Your prime minister is the lead prime minister on ICT, and he is on the verge of making sure that we can have a flat roaming rate, which is really more like a single domestic rate within the context of the Caribbean community going forward. And we had hoped to finish that, but of course, people were distracted. But I give you the assurance that for the CSME, it is a critical factor, and therefore we will continue to work with Prime Minister Mitchell on giving these real benefits to the people of the region.
Delve into that area, but you touched it a bit. But my next question would have been, in light of the pending Liat collapse, is the heads of governments willing to finally consider privatizing the aviation sector so that travelers will benefit from possibly lower airfares and increased movement?
Well, I think that the conversations that we've been having with each other relate around ensuring that we do that which is necessary to allow those airlines that can move people to do so. Liat is a treasured institution, and we regret that it has come to this stage. Over hundreds of millions of dollars of debt, accumulated legacy debt, and a very difficult environment within which to function. There are other airlines there. How best can we facilitate them and to make sure that they can provide, as I said, that safe, affordable, and reliable travel? And I believe that heads have agreed that, look, we're going to look at taxes, and Prime Minister Mitchell has been strong on this again. Prime Minister Gonzalez has already started. We are looking at it in Barbados. A number of us recognize that even if we had needed the money before, we're going to have to create that kind of environment to be able to stimulate travel in the region, because travel has a greater multiplier effect within the context of our economies than other things. Secondly, we're going to have to look and see how we can also deal with the licensing, because in some instances, even though we have these other 29 regional airlines all about the place, in some instances, they don't have access to the fifth freedom and the seventh freedom rights that they need to be able to move easily between the islands. So that's our role as governments. I do believe that the private sector ought to be taking the lead. I saw that the former chief economist of the Caribbean Development Bank, Justin Ram, in today's papers making the same point, and I agree with him. I think governments may keep small shares in whatever may be created to be able to give the private sector investors the comfort that we are not going to subject them to regulatory confusion and long processes. But predominantly, we need lean entities that are private sector driven, and where people are focused on how do they stay afloat through making a profit and through ensuring that there's adequate cash flow while providing the service to our people.
Your passion for the region. So, in this context, the issue of Guyana, and I realize you're not getting much love from some of Guyanese folks lately. How do you feel about what has been transpiring from a head perspective?
As I said, the whole thing is unfortunate. The matter is actually being argued before the court now, and we'll wait and see what happens. But we can't hide from the fact that the notion of having an election at the 2nd of March and not having a result on the 1st of July, tomorrow is the 2nd of July, April, May, June, July, 4 months later, is the most unusual experience. And therefore, it is not going to do the region any credit for this matter to remain unresolved.
Two more questions in terms of one that I asked my Prime Minister Mitchell some time ago when he was on the program. The issue of the exploration of marijuana as a progressive industry in the region. When are the regional heads going to have that conversation? Because we're seeing other, well, let's use for instance America, something that was, a crime now being used for health benefits and what have you. When will we have that conversation?
Well, at a regional level, I'm not sure. I hope sooner. We were to have a major summit on social issues that are critical, but we also have to have one on public health issues. In our own instance in Barbados, like Jamaica, like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, like Antigua and Barbuda, we've passed a medicinal cannabis bill. We've not gone the second stage to decriminalize possession, and that is because the party gave a election commitment that we would go to a referendum on recreational cannabis use. Um, Obviously, what has happened in the last 6 months has completely dislocated the calendar with respect to normal business of government. But we will get to that eventually because we recognize that we don't want to continue to make people criminals in our society for minimal possession. But this is a societal wedge issue and has to be the subject of a wider discussion. I told you principles only mean something when it's inconvenient to stand by them. And if you agree that the principle that wedge issues ought to be discussed widely by the society, then we have to do it. With respect to the medicinal cannabis industry, we're about to conclude our regulations, which will allow the industry to get up and start. But that, in my view, is going to lay a platform for serious agronomic research and scientific research and other kinds of jobs to come out of it in the industry. And we should therefore pursue it as one with credibility. One, because we have the international business platform, although we need to get on top of the question of use of currency in terms of cross-border trading. The Americans actually have been almost genius at what they've done because in many states, 33 states, they've made it legal, but it's illegal to go cross-border, cross-state. And therefore, what they do is to protect the market at the state level to their individual citizens. But at some point, we're going to have to address this whole issue of what currency you're going to trade in because you can't trade in US dollars since it is, in fact, illegal at a federal level. But the Canadians have legalized both cannabis, medicinal and recreational cannabis. And therefore, as a region, I believe that conversation is going to start to take place more with them. As it relates to our maturity to have these discussions as a region, I would much rather that many of them are regional and rather than simply national. Because when you look at it, almost every country in the region is facing the same issues along the same time. And that's why you've heard me say more and more, why don't we have a strong regional television program? We go and watch CNN and we go and watch BBC and we learn about Europe and we learn about the UK and we know about Iowa and we know about all other small towns in the US, but we can't learn about what's going on in St. George's, or we can't learn about what's going on in Belmopan, or what's going on in Paramaribo, or what's going on in Castries, or Kingstown, as opposed to Kingston, Bridgetown. These are the things that we need to know. And we know it through music. When we're watching cricket, we're watching it together. When we're listening to music, we're listening to it together. I like Grenadian Kaiso, you like Bajan Kaiso, we like Trinidad Kaiso, we like Jamaican music. But when it comes to news, we're segmenting it. And when it comes to national discussions, we're segmenting it. And yet, all of these are discussions that as a society we need to have because 100 years ago, cannabis was legal in our part of the world. Okay? And there's a whole host of other things that we need to begin to understand. The other thing is that we need to be able to understand how do we deconstruct the legacy of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria cannot, in the third decade of the 21st century, be ruling over us in terms of how we deal with our criminal justice system. Or we can't still be dealing with 1940s education reform that set England to be able to control people rather than to allow us to make our children the best that they can be by being able to give them the opportunities to be good at things in school rather than assuming that school is only about academics and doesn't have anything to do with social and emotional learning, which we all know that that's when your whole personality and your whole thing is set within that context. So that if you don't help nurture a child's ability to deal with emotions at school and to be able to deal with other people at school, what kind of citizen you're really sending them to be. So these are some difficult decisions. Ironically, it also means that we have to also understand, Mighty Gabby talks about Westminster choking we. And he's so right, because we have to have the confidence now, especially against the background with the international community not being able to see us and not wanting to hear us most of the time. We have to have the confidence of trying to work out what is it that works for us constitutionally? What is it that works for us in terms of our governance mechanism? And the truth is that while I know for sure, you can't tell Caribbean people or people who are the descendants of former slaves that they can't do nothing, because they're going to defy you, and they're going to do it. Because for centuries, we resented the fact that we were told no, or we had censorship, or we were constrained in what we can do. So how do we unlock that potential? And how do we get the conversations going that will allow us to move collectively together easier and better? That's a hard conversation. And we're not even talking about political federation, because the truth is no political party in the region is talking to each other about those matters. So we're not trying to pursue that at this stage, although I'm conscious that we may well find ourselves within the next decade or two in this world, recognizing that the context of what is a viable small state, what size is a viable small state, may well change. And we have to be ready for these discussions rather than being simply the victims of others having the conversation and putting us to accept what they say is good for us. We got to say what's good for us. And that means sometimes having difficult conversations in the house, in the family, in the region.
I know you've got your country to run, so we'll have to let you go. But of course, I mean, how you mentioned a while ago, but Caribbean, how we come together for different carnivals. No crop over. How is Barbadians dealing with that?
Well, we're not having the formal crop over, but we've come up with something I hope that can work, called satellite zoom-in fets, where we've agreed that, look, I said at the beginning of the journey when we won the government that you have to give people a little breakfast before they go on a long journey. And that's what allowed us to be able to give people a 5% salary increase, and pensioners, non-contributory pensioners, 45% increase, or buy buses and trucks, etc. But in the middle of a journey as well, you got to take a little rest. You got to take a little respite. And as long as we continue within the context of where we are, there are no patients at the moment in quarantine or in the isolation facilities. There's nobody who's tested. We're still testing every day. We do have a repatriation flight coming soon. So we know that once those flights come again, that you're going to have some issues. We've been also facilitating the repatriation of tens of thousands of crew to cruise ships. So we know that there's always that risk, but so long as we can minimize the risk, then I believe that the people deserve some form of respite. And if we can have small gatherings, if we can connect people on pastures and outdoor venues through the technology that exists, and allow them to have a little dance and a little drink and a little food, and for those who sell and make their money from this to be able to do that, then why not? Because we're going to be here in October, November, and December. And we have to be able to know when to literally accelerate and when to brake. And so long as the population is in sync with us, it's no different from dancing. If we're dancing together, we're moving together, we're chipping together, we're going forward and we're coming back together. So the key is understanding the rhythm of what is required from us in this COVID season. And with that rhythm allows us a little relief, but it also allows us lockdown, requires of us lockdown when necessary.
It was an absolute pleasure having you in the ladies' room this morning. So before we leave, final words to to the listeners and viewers of our show.
I can't wait. I can't wait till I'm back in Grenada. I can't wait till I'm moving around the region again. And I ask us in the region to understand that, look, go back 100 years ago and understand that our parents and grandparents, in fact, I'll contextualize it. My grandmother, 100 years ago, was living in St. George's. My grandmother was going to school at a time when World War I was taking place. My grandmother would not have known that she would have had to live in a region that would have been the victim of the Great Depression up north, or that thereafter that Great Depression would find itself expressing itself with instability across the entire region in the 1930s. And at the same time, the discussions about blackness and the ability to freedom and for independence and political organization and worker organization was also taking place. And little did they know that after going through all of that, they would have World War II to go through as well. So I know we have it in us to rise to the occasion. I know we have it in us. If we have to eat big grain rice again, and in Grenada, I'm sure you know what big grain rice is, which is what we used to eat in Barbados during the war, which is sweet potato. We're going to do all the things that are necessary to keep sustenance, to keep giving our children the right values, and to give them the tools that they need educationally and socially to be the best that they can be globally. That's why we have Nobel Prize winners from the region. That's why we have people, in our own instance in Barbados, we revere people like our national hero, Guy Silver's Right Excellence, Sir Garfield Sobers, or Rihanna, or others. And I can go country by country. Grenada, there is nobody who is greater than the mighty sparrow when it comes to be able to deal with the art of calypso without, I say so, without fear of contradiction. Okay, and therefore we have in each country attained levels of excellence that we can make sure that those coming up now can also attain. So I look forward to all of that, and let's keep talking. And that's why I was so happy to do the interview with you.
Having you back in the room because the audience apparently can't get enough and saying we're going too soon. But listen, too soon. We were supposed to have Prime Minister for 15 minutes and we went way past the 15. So we are eternally grateful. But we'd love to have you back again at your convenience, of course, to continue the conversation, post COVID. Because one thing I think we need to understand is that COVID is here and we're going to have to learn to live with it as best as we can. And we just can't stop the world forever for COVID. We have to at some point pick up and move along again. So I am so happy to have had you here this morning, and for everyone who's in the room, you getting so much love is not even funny. We really appreciate you, and we're thankful for you being with us this morning.
And I hope that I get the opportunity to host you in Barbados. So please, one love, blessings.
Minister Motley. And that just about concludes our program this morning inside the ladies' room. We were speaking with the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister Mia Motley, and for that we are extremely grateful. Thanks so much, guys, for following along. Those of you who sent in questions and what have you. I'm going to go through and see if I can take some of the questions and, of course, have the Prime Minister back again at some point to continue that conversation. Don't forget, tomorrow we have another powerful lady, Yvette Noah Sure. She's going to be here, publicist to Beyonce, and, of course, bringing Buju under her wing as well. We will be having her in the ladies' room. So you guys, hope to see you here again for another conversation. So until then, thanks so much for powering up. And of course, this segment came to you compliments Beacon Insurance, Subway, and the Western Union. Happy Wednesday, guys.